Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Creative Insider podcast number 65 with me, Georgi. In today's podcast, I had the pleasure to talk with Indian architecture graduate and architectural writer Saili Sawantt. During her bachelor studies at the University of Mumbai, Sayli has become more and more aware of her passion for the storytelling behind every architectural design rather than the design itself. So she decides to pursue her dream of becoming an architectural writer. She starts first blogging, and she does that activity for a couple of years. She devours hundreds of architectural books. And after this hustle, she managed to land her first internship at a small online design media. There, she makes her steps as a writer, she improves her skills, and since then, she has become a freelancer, and her signature is under articles in media such as Rethinking the Future and Parametric Architecture. But before we start the conversation, I want to thank you for listening to this podcast, and I want to remind you that if you want to support our work and our show and to keep it going, you can do that by just subscribing to the platform you're listening to and leaving a good review in case you're listening on Apple Podcasts. If you would like to stay in touch with us and what is going on the show and to support us further on, I suggest you to check out thecreativeinsider.com, where not only you can listen to all the episodes, but you can subscribe to our newsletter, with which you would get a free guide about how to organize your digital filing system. To get such a guest as Sayli and to get more guests on our show, we need a platform. And to have a bigger platform, another great thing that you can do to support us is to following our social media, which are Instagram at TCI Podcast and the LinkedIn page, The Creative Insider, where you can just subscribe and you will have a bigger platform for all these creative minds. Last but not least, producing a podcast, it's an expensive activity. We have put in some money, and if you have the chance, you can support us on Patreon. You'll find the link in the description. You can start with $5 a month, or if you cannot afford $5, you can go even lower. But do that only if you can, and we will be very thankful. And for once we have reached a certain amount of Patreon, we'll give you some perks, some exclusive perks. So please do that. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the show. And now enjoy the conversation with Saili Sawantt. Hello, Sayli. How are you?
I'm great, Georgi. Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show, on the podcast. I was really excited when this opportunity arose because I like to have, different people on the show so that I can learn a lot, but also the audience can learn a lot about the different fields of creativity. So for the people who don't know you, you can introduce yourself a little bit and tell people who you are and what you do.
Okay. First of all, I love the name, The Creative Insider. It sounds very, it's very trendy. And when you told me about the podcast, I checked out the way you kind of share it on Instagram and all other places. It's very interesting. And the conversations are also interesting because right now I've recently started getting addicted to podcast and audiobooks, everything audio. And I like the way the people that you kind of invite. So I'm glad that I'm one of them. And to introduce me, I am an architect turned into a writer. So I'm actually between both. So I'm an architect who writes, which makes me an architectural writer, just to blend those both words. And I started working as an architect, a practicing architect. But later on, I realized that my niche is towards writing. So now I'm a full time freelance writer. And I collaborate with a lot of digital print-based portals, magazines, basically anything and any form of content related to design or the AC industry for that matter. So yeah.
Yeah, this was very interesting for me from your background. And but every conversation we do here, I always try to get to know the personality that's in front of me, because I don't know 90% of the people who join me. I know they have an interesting background, an interesting profession, but I don't know them personally. So I'm curious, how come in your life in your younghood or whenever it was, that you thought for yourself, oh, I actually might be a professional creative, I can become a professional architect? Was it like a passion that you discover yourself, or maybe do you have a family that's already in the field? How did you think about going in this direction?
So, from the start, we kind of realize a lot later when we are inclined towards that creative background. Because I don't know if it's an Indian way or it's global, but here we are kind of emphasized to take the technical courses more. For example, you should be an engineer, you should be a doctor. And I come from a family where my father is a doctor. So, from a very initial stage, it was always like, you are going to study medicine. And I was scared of hospitals, frankly. I don't like the idea of hospitals at all. And just to imagine spending 12 hours there made me really sick, frankly. So I had another family member, two of them. One was studying in an architectural college when I was maybe 10 years old. And I saw these models, and I saw what she was doing on her laptop, making some structure, etc. And I asked her that, oh, okay, so this is like a hobby thing that you're doing, right? She said, no, this is my profession. And then I asked her that, okay, what is this profession exactly? And then she told me all about the coursework, how, we have to travel, we get to learn so much. And she told me one important thing, that it's not just about building, you can be an architect and you can do a lot, many things. And so I started researching, okay, what things we can do. And I was sold, because frankly, I've never found any other profession as interesting as what we do, because it's very satisfying. In spite of it being a technical profession, it gives you that content kind of a feeling. So, yeah, I think architecture was a very, like, I knew what I was getting into before getting into the profession, but I always thought that designing is what I'm going to do by the end of it. But when I started my first year, second year, third year, that's when I realized that there is a lot of writing also involved. So it could be our subjects like architectural theory or humanities, or even if you want to explain your juries, like when you're talking to juries, you have to talk a lot, you have to sell, and for that you need words, a script. And I started enjoying that part of architecture more. And you kind of realize now, if you're in third year or fourth year, you sort of realize that I like software, so maybe I should do something in that. Or maybe, I like the theory part of it, let's find career options in that. So by third year, fourth year, I had a clear idea that designing is not my take, and I would very much like to do something where I can write about architecture rather than design in it. So yeah, that's how it all started.
But you're not the first guest on the podcast from India, and it's so funny because sometimes we try to break, cliches, but kind of like all the guests that I had from India told me that this is the expectation from you when you're a kid, that you become rather an engineer or a doctor. And you told me that you saw this friend of yours, or this person that you know, when you were 10. So early in your life, you were already starting being directed in which direction to go. Is that the level of competition that you have guys there, or it was just your case?
I didn't get your question. Like, you said that I saw.
No, did I understood right that the first time you saw this person working as an architect, you were 10 years old?
Right.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Like so young already, you have to pick a direction in which you want to go, or was your case?
The thing is, the minute you start learning ABCD, the family kind of starts predicting that, this, if you're playing with building blocks, then maybe engineer. If you're playing the doctor set or something, I don't know what is that called, then your inclination is there. So it starts very early, but even in our childhood, it's like if you're more inclined towards building blocks or Legos for that matter, which I was. So it kind of tells a lot how you're going to later grow up, because all these small habits kind of build into that entire career. We feel that we are 15, we have to now choose a career for us, but I think it starts pretty early. So for me, reading for that matter, like my father used to he compelled me to read one book each day. It was a compulsion. He said that you could do anything, but if you're not reading, you really, you should be reading. This should be like for everyone for their entire life, to read as much as they can. So from that, and now that conditioning for 10 years to just read every day led to this. So it's actually those entire years of growing up kind of define as to what you're going to do later on, I feel.
And so you went through your whole schooling years, and when it was the time to access university, what was the process, and where did you study architecture, at which university?
So I studied architecture in University of Mumbai, right where I stay. And it was pretty interesting because I love design schools. I mean, in our high school, there is this strict, you have your textbooks, you have to just learn something and give exams. But design schools are so interesting. I don't know, in first year we started models. We made like 100, 200s of just models. And when you enter a design school, you realize that it's entirely a different zone. It's from A, B, C, D. You have to start learning everything from scratch. And yeah, that was pretty interesting, which I think University of Mumbai was really great in doing that.
And was it difficult to enter this university? Did you have like an enter test, or how did it work?
Yeah, so we have an entrance test which is known as NATA or NATE. So that is one entrance test that everyone has to give all over India. Other than that, there are also many regional exams that you can give, and your basic high school graduation in maths as a core subject. You need maths for that, since architecture is considered as a technical profession, both creative and technical. So to suffice that, you need maths as a core subject. So yeah, that's pretty much the process to get into any college in University of Mumbai.
And then you went through their both bachelor and masters. You did that the same year?
No, as of now, I'm just done with my masters. So from the past 1 year, and writing and working has been happening for the past 2-3 years now.
Okay. I'm curious. What was curious for me? It's like, of course, to write about something like architecture. It's very helpful to be an educated architect, because, of course, you have a better understanding of the field. It's like compared to, I don't know, being a sports commentator. If you don't know anything about the sport, it's really difficult to give an opinion or commenting it or even writing. But another thing that I was wondering is like English, it's not your native language somehow, right? So you needed to, or you guys start to learn it like also very early in your life, so that it's kind of your second mother language. Because I write a lot of things for this podcast, although a lot of like people don't get that, but I do some podcasts where I would break down a topic or I'll break down a book, and then I need to write about it, and I do it in English because the podcast is in English, and it's not easy. So I'm curious, how did you learn English at this level that you're a writer now?
So I was in a convent school. So when you're in that kind of a schooling, English is something that's pretty much there from the early start. But you're right, because when we come home, we do speak in our regional languages. So our daily vocabulary always goes into our regional language like Hindi or Marathi. And you can pretty much talk in a lot of depth with that language as compared to English. So that was the very reason why my father kind of put a lot of pressure on me that you have to read as much as English as you can. And I wasn't that great in writing English. Talking is a different thing, but when you sit and you write is when you realize that it's really complex and conveying an idea, because in your head you're pretty much clear on how you want to tell the people that story. But once you start writing, sometimes you have that feeling that I can't find the right words. So for that, the easiest thing that I did was whenever I'm Netflixing, subtitles on. It's a
Okay.
very easy method. So it's basically you kind of realize the pronunciation also. You can read the spelling, what is there, and you can actually see how people are using that word. So there is a quote someone had said that you will progress in life when you start uh, looking above the subtitle section. But for writing, I think it's the opposite. The minute we start reading the subtitles and watching is when we start getting that finesse. I mean, I think reading is not enough and just for writing. You
Y-
have to watch a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting because I learned English this way basically because we had English at school, but of course, what you learn there, it's not enough. And then first, I started watching movies in English with subtitles in my native language, and then I would understand, oh, these words mean this, and they use it in this context. And then I would switch slowly to English subtitles, and then now I don't need really subtitles, but as you said, it might be a great training to improve your skills as a writer. And I use a lot of digital tools too nowadays. It's very easy because we have this technology that helps you a lot. There are tools like Grammarly, and there are tools like DeepL, which translates in a very good level different languages. Do you used to help yourself sometimes with such tools, or now you're at level where you don't need that anymore?
No, I don't think anyone will ever be at that level that Grammarly or tools like these won't come to help, because in smaller ways they do enhance our writing a lot, and enhancement is always good. There's also Hemingway editor that I use a lot because sometimes we don't realize we kind of write in our flow. Sometimes the sentences are too long, and we might think it's a good sentence, but tools like these come really handy, and I do use them a lot. So Grammarly and Hemingway editor are something I thoroughly believe in. I don't send any article or anything forward if I haven't run it across it. And it helps. I mean, you have to kind of use it, and there are so many tools. I mean, it's endless. Grammarly and Hemingway are just one of them that we know, but I do use them a lot these days.
Yes, I forgot to mention the Hemingway. I have used sometimes too because it's really easy to really simple down your words, and I think also because when you're not native English speaker, you sometimes build the sentences in your own language, which works slightly in a different way, and then when it's turned into English, sometimes can come across complicated or long.
Completely, yeah.
And
But right now, what has happened is that there are so many tools to help us. For writers, before it was typewriter, and before that, it was you just have to write. And if you're doing a mistake, cancel it with pen, and that too, it's an ink pen. So if there is an issue of water spilling, etc., that thing is gone. So right now, I think to be a good writer is something to kind of just research enough to research. I think good writing and research go hand in hand. So if you're very well researched and your intentions are really great, I mean, there are so many things written about, for example, what is sustainability, but you need to kind of realize that what I need to achieve out of sustainability for this article, because it's a very wide word, anything can come under sustainability. So something like that, these tools are there to help us, but in the end it all matters what we want to tell, our story, and the intention that we want to convey, for that matter. Yeah.
And you mentioned you've been studying and writing at the same time. I'm curious, how did you first? Okay, you mentioned you realized through your studies that you really enjoyed talking and explaining architecture, your designs, and then writing about it. I'm curious, you realized that, so you were conscious about it. How was your process to find your first job or assignment as a writer? Did you start going through online or through friends? How did you do this little transition to be like, okay, I want to be a writer, to actually get a gig as a writer?
Okay. So, by the second year, I started reading a lot of architectural books. Um, from the first year, the architectural books were a bit complicated for me, because when you're reading a lot of fiction, non-fiction, and suddenly you're introduced to design-related books, that's a very different vocabulary. Reading any, for example, Bernard Shumee book, it's like a lot to take in first year. But by second year, I started enjoying it. Our subjects like architectural theory or humanities, and all those assignments related to that, where we had to write papers and journals, etc.
Which
So
which
one
book
of my
which book did you mention that you read and was very hard for you in the beginning?
I read one by Bernard Shumee,
Okay.
the architect. I don't remember the name. And I also went across Charles Correa's book, which is related to urbanization. So I can't remember the name.
It's
Urbanization and something.
yeah.
Yeah,
I've read some of those, and I've read also like Delirious New York, and that's also quite hard to read, I think.
exactly. Delirious New York, I read 50 pages and then post that in my first year because of the buzz around it. Post that I picked up the Bjarke Ingels book, Yes is More, because I was like, okay, this one has sketches. First year, I'll pass first year. That is what happened. But my one of my teachers told me after reading an essay, maybe blogging, or you could just and all these things. Till then, I had everything in my laptop in a Word document. I was too scared to kind of, show it to people that this is what I've been writing. And another of my friend told me that you should start blogging. So I started blogging, and I opened a website. I opened a website on WordPress, and they were very unstructured blogs. They were just my thoughts, for that matter. Post that, I did a thesis on so it was a lot of dead spaces and going through case studies, etc. So I wrote a lot of things on crematorium. So one of my blog was tagged as a day in a crematorium. So it kind of got a lot of buzz because I kind of turned it into a funny way that people are really taking death very seriously, something like that. And then that stir caused, and I started writing one by one. After 2 years of blogging, I think I realized that okay, maybe now I can send something outside and there could be some chances of me getting selected, because in India we have a lot of population, so you have to be uh, experienced or something like that. If you're a fresh architect or fresh graduate, it's kind of tough to get into good places. So experience is something really important. So getting my first internship was really tough because everybody asks that where did you work before, and when you say no, I haven't worked anywhere, it's a very complex thing to get into such places. So I started interning in small websites, small architectural websites, who were newbies just starting out, needed new talent, needed not that high paying architects to write for them. So I started with these guys and I interned for say 6 months. And after that, I moved on to part time, full time opportunities, because I thought that in order to get into freelancing, there's a lot of journey that one has to go through. So I started part timing, full timing. And after maybe a year is when I got my first proper freelance gig. So I was getting those small ones which lasted like one week, 2 week, but after a year it started into something, a retaining kind of a thing. But freelancing was tough initially. Like initially it was very tough because freelancing is basically you're your own team. You have to decide everything, and it gets tough if you're not going through this entire system of internship and then full-time, part-time jobs, contract, and then freelance. So something like that. And
But I'm
initially,
curious.
yes,
I'm curious about the blogging, because you mentioned you started blogging and you said you started blogging for 2 years, which is it's a long time. And I'm curious, how did you, with which mindset did you start this blog? Did you start like, okay, of course, the mentality was I need to start writing to get better, to be at the level that I need to be a writer. But were you used to, how did you pick up the topics, and did you discipline yourself on saying, okay, I need to write at least one article a week, or I don't know, what was your pace to write an article? Because when we go on these self projects, like I can talk from experience. When I started this podcast, I thought I'm going to do 5 episodes, which was around the free uploading time for the platform that hosts my podcast. And I'll do it with my phone and I see if I like it. And if I like it, I'll keep doing it. But then I have to really tell myself, no matter what, every week there should be an episode. Otherwise, I know myself, I'm going to lack of discipline. And once you miss 1 week, you can say, I'm going to miss the next one. And then you start missing lots of weeks. So how did you deal with this blog? Did you discipline yourself? And did you try to promote it a lot so that people read it and you can get feedback? How was your approach to this blog?
So blogging was more of to boost my self-confidence over to actually making something out of it. Because I think every writer goes through it. Now, even if I read something that I've written 6 months ago, I'm going to just criticize it on my own, that I don't like this, what have I written, something like that. So this was just my way to boost self-confidence in me, that maybe I can do this. So I started doing it, and the way you said, same thing, I became extremely lazy, because architecture, it's a lot, it's not like some normal coursework, it's very hectic. So I made a point that once a month at least I put something up on the blog. So at start it was mainly certain observations, etc. And maybe after 6 months we start getting clarity of maybe we know what it's going to be. So it's named the Readers Express, and right now I have 2 to 3 other people working on those blogs also, where we post, etc. But initially it was just to get out of that fear, because even the way you said, when you started the Creative Insider, we always have that fear that now I can see you so confidently talking, etc. But when you started, you're very skeptical of that judgment, or of that self-judgment for that matter. You're going to be, I don't like this one, this is like this. So we need to kind of get ahead of that entire phase to just be like, I know what I'm doing. Like, people say what they want, I'm going to keep doing it, something like that.
Yeah, and as you said in the beginning, me personally, I was also very scared not to sound stupid, and then you get a little bit, not disappointed, but it's surprising how when you consume content, everything seems so easy, and you realize how easy it is to criticize somebody when you're sitting on the other side. But when you go on the side of the content creator, it's very, very you realize how hard it is to make something sound so smooth, or in your case would be to write something smoothly. But after a while, in the beginning, that was your, like, as you said, to boost your self-confidence, and sort of in the case of audio, it's somehow learning to listen your own voice, because now when I listen my podcast, I don't care that it's me talking. But at some point, did you try to promote it somehow so that you can some feedback from readers, or did you just share it with your friends? Who were your first readers in this blog?
So I showed it to the same friends who told me to start the blog, because English was their native language. So it was their mother tongue. So I thought that, these guys are the best critiques that I can get. Plus, they were architectural students. So I started showing blogs to them. And it started with really basic corrections that, there's no comma here. You should, put a question mark, do this, do that. So somewhere I started showing them, because I was very underconfident to kind of tell everyone that, I have a blog, share it, etc. And I remember the initial 10 blogs, I have edited each one of them at least 10 times. Every time I got a review, once it was published, going back, editing, oh, this is not right. But that thing gave me that confidence that, okay, some things cannot be right, but eventually we'll realize it. So later, after a year or two, I started actually promoting it, that, hey guys, new blog is up, like, share, comment, and all those things. They started happening 2 years later. And yeah.
And how did that go? Because in the beginning, for example, when you broadcast something, no matter what it is, if it's an article or a podcast, you don't, when it's just in the beginning, it's for you, it's whatever. Anyone who read it, it's just nice to see any reader or any visualization or whatever. But when you start doing it for a while, then, for example, for me, I try not to look too much at the numbers anymore, because I know that if I see that one episode has more views and then the next one less, it's frustrating somehow, because you think, okay, maybe it's not worth it. How did you dealt with this when you started doing it more like openly? Like, did you had any struggles with this up and down of visualizations or followers or whatever? And did you promote it? What it was, social media? What was your way to promote it?
So blog, as of now, is now when I have actually started promoting it. Before that, it was more of a personal thing. It's still a very personal thing. But the way you said, it was the same thing while freelancing. So in order to get more gigs, we obviously put it on LinkedIn. We try to share it and we see how many views we have got, etc. And that did affect me, for sure. It affects everyone. But the best thing that I did was, once it's uploaded, once I've shared it, end of the story. Not looking back as to how many views, etc. I think that's the best way, because just like you, I do the same thing, that, okay, how many views, how many readers, and it can affect us, and it can affect the work also, for that matter. If we hear a judgmental comment, and then next time we are only thinking about that while writing or recording. So letting go, once it's on published, bye, something like that.
And the first internship you mentioned you managed to land, did you also get paid for those, or in the beginning was unpaid internships so that you gathered just some experience?
The thing is, there were chances where the places were good, but it was unpaid, and I didn't take it because I don't stand by it. I mean, even if you're working for someone, you're kind of putting in your resources, you're putting in your hard work, and unpaid is something I don't support. Even right now in LinkedIn, all my posts are more inclined towards kind of telling students to not go for this kind of a situation where you're not getting paid. So I instead worked in smaller firms at a smaller pay, but somewhere where my thoughts and work was respected, because as architects, I think we do work very hard right from our internship days, and doing something unpaid is something, I don't know, no one should be doing that, I feel, frankly. And it's shocking that people do that. I mean, all those employers have once been architectural students themselves, and they have been through that. So yeah, I don't support it. So unpaid was never an option.
I think this is really correct because if people go and listen to one of the first podcasts I did when I was breaking down some topics in 15 minutes or so, one of my first podcasts was exactly about that, about you have to, how to think about your education and all the years that you have spent and money, and because people think, okay, I've spent some money on my education, but you also actually spent money that you didn't earn, because in this time, if you were working, you could be earning money, and then you spend your time. The least what you spend on any job is your time. So if you don't get paid, at least keep your free time for yourself, because that's something that nobody gonna give you back, and then you're gonna be just spending it on somebody's wealth, because if you work, somebody's making some money out of it. So I totally agree with you. And how long did you say you needed to switch from these internships to being freelance? Around how long time?
It took a year. So first, the freelance opportunities came, but they were not on a retaining basis. It was mainly one article, two articles, something like that, maybe editing or proofreading. So it was not something that I could take that leap from full time to jumping into freelancing, because that's a very scary transition, I feel, because it's something that a full time or a job offers is stability. So to make your mind conditioned to that aspect that, okay, now it's going to be unstable, but I'm going to try my best to keep it stable. So it took me a year, and it was really great to wait for 1 year before getting into freelancing. Because when there's someone actually screening you, say your senior, your boss, someone screening your work and giving you criticism, you can actually construct from it. I mean, you kind of learn a lot from it. So directly, if you jump into freelancing, there is a high chance that we'll feel lost, and there is a high chance that whatever you deliver won't be up to the mark. So yeah, it took me 1 year of internship and full-time job to transition into freelancing.
How were those mentors you had and those people that were screening your work? Because in the profession of architectural design, let's say, sometimes it can happen that you have really rough critique, whether from your professor or from your boss. It can be really like sometimes also really raw and rough, like with swear words and so on. Is it, how was in your field that you're more writing? Can it happen the same, or was more constructive?
Yeah, I think it differs from office to office, from people to people. So my first internship was the most tragic experience of my life, because within the first week I was given loads and loads of work. I had zero experience and I didn't know what to do. And people assumed as if we are already architects, but there's a difference why we are called interns. So I left that job the way you mentioned, rough, swearing, criticism, all of that happened. And it was not exactly constructive. And so that's why I left that. But my next internship was when I worked with a developer company named Coachridge. So at that time, they did ask me that, we know you're an architect, but are you inclined towards writing? We could actually give you some work related to that as well on the side, if you're willing to do both. And I was more than happy. So I think there are all kinds of mentors, all kinds of teachers, and we need to know which are the ones who are actually going to help us construct. So there have been some teachers who have really given me a hard time, like my thesis guide. He told me to change my design 3 to 4 times, 5 times. I can't remember how many times. But when I looked at the end product, I knew why he was doing that. And at the end of it is when he told me that, yeah, I'm happy with you now. But over that entire span, there was no comment on that. So it's not necessary that if anyone criticizes you, you're doing bad. Sometimes if you kind of improvise on it, you can turn that project into something really nice and something you're really proud of. But that is the part that you mentioned about the industry, on the way people treat you. most of them don't treat you right. I don't know if it's a global thing, but in India, um, I have no clue why there is no sense of respect or structuring, especially in the architectural industry. Uh, there's a lot of criticism that happens, and there is a lot of what you can say, it's very fast paced. So people don't really wait for interns to catch up, for young people to catch up. And I think that as a whole, we need to work on.
Well, I think it's also because of from the client side also it's very fast paced because everyone expecting their building as quick as possible, and they try to cut corners and to be quicker. And I think that this is something that always architectural firms needs to position themselves and say what they stand for.
Yeah.
But among
But on this, I would want to add a point that there are always going to be clients who are going to tell you that we need this in a day or two. But in India, is what I'm saying, because I know this terrain. I've seen firms where people work 10 hours, 12 hours, 16 hours a day. I mean, that is something I don't know. That is not something that is supposed to happen, because just because architectural coursework is hectic, that doesn't mean that the profession also has to be. And 16 hours a day is not. Maybe you should just tell the client, we might take 15 days. Just hold on. So that is the stand I think the firms have to take, because it's not healthy to kind of make students, or you yourself are working for so long. So I don't agree with the way things are.
Yeah, for
And that's
sure.
the very reason why I turned to freelancing, actually, to be very honest, that because all of this thing that you're working for 12 hours, 16 hours is not really healthy. And there is a high chance that I've seen a lot of my colleagues, my friends, they have sort of started hating architecture because of the kind of work culture that we have. And we are creative, passionate people who have chosen architecture. So it's the industry's responsibility to kind of treat it well, maybe treat people well. Yeah.
Well, I think that another option is also to try to change the culture is broadcasting, as you do, as you write, and as I'm trying to do with this podcast, doing it in an independent way and speak out for the things we stand for, despite criticism. And I think that this is something that people need to understand, that if they don't stand up for themselves, nobody will do so. First decision is to quit that job that makes you work 12 hours, 16 hours a day, because this is not healthy and not good for you. And then sometimes also I always say we have this, when you're studying, you get all this marketing content from architectural firms, and sometimes you want so badly to join a firm, and then when you get in there you realize how hard and harsh the working environment there is, but you stay because of your pride and your ego.
Yes.
And then, I mean, in the end of the day, you can be a great designer without working for the greatest office, what is on paper or whatsoever. But
Yeah.
but you have in your let's say background, what I can see is that you have worked for some, so to say, very popular names within architecture magazines or online magazines. You have written for Rethinking the Future, which I've been seeing very often in my feeds and online I've been checking. And then Parametric Architecture, which is a huge, so to say, page that broadcasts parametric design. Did you work for those two names as a freelancer, and how did you get this? How do you get now these gigs? Like they come to you and give you a topic, or you write a topic, and then how does it work?
So I worked as an editor for Rethinking the Future, and I started very early, a year back. And it was mainly they had an opening, I applied, and then all these things followed by that. Parametric architecture came much later, where one of the person who was working at Parametric Architecture suggested me to the CEO that maybe we could use her as a writer. And then But LinkedIn has been the lifesaver tool. Uh, it has given me the most nicest clients, the most trustworthy clients have been from LinkedIn. I tried Upwork for a while, but the Upwork's policy. It's basically there's one person who's working for $5, somebody working for 30, some could take 60. So there is no what you can say, there's no standard for it. So even though you might charge a certain amount and you can give that much quality to that, but Upwork is something that is not very I would not recommend that. But when it's about LinkedIn, you can pretty much position your services and yourself the way you want, and people do respond. If I mean, uh, parametric architecture, rethinking, Foyd, everyone has approached, or I have approached them through LinkedIn, and um, I don't know. I think it's good that you need to kind of get into all of these social media domain is what we call, because in my college years I used to think that I'm an architect, I'm a creative, people will find me or something like that. We have this kind of a misconception, but you need to kind of be out there. And for example, if you have a really nice render, if you have written something, you have clicked a nice photograph, and you might be a student, it's okay to start sharing all these things on LinkedIn. So, this way you kind of are branding your services, you're branding yourself, which is actually great. And it will help you a lot to kind of grow um, your business, it will help you get you a lot of gigs, etc. So, yeah.
What kind of gigs or what kind of people have contacted you for a job through LinkedIn? If you may share some of your experience, because this is it's everything is a tool and depends how you use it. And I'm curious, how did you use it, and what kind of people did you attract it?
So when I started LinkedIn 2 years ago, I started basic uh, sharing my published articles, which were already I had written through my internship. I started sharing my internship certificates, etc. And apart from that, I actually started sharing my thoughts about the industry, about the way that we are talking right now through this podcast, something that is bothering me about the industry, say unpaid work or any sort of issues or pay parity. So I started talking about it on LinkedIn, and through that, parametric architecture, Foyd, people from all these companies started um, approaching me that we want to write something like that. You might have certain experience, so do share your CV, portfolio, etc. with us, and then we can take it ahead. So that is how this entire process started. So even now, on my LinkedIn, every time there is a published article, I make it a point that I share it on my LinkedIn, on my Instagram, because first of all, you get a lot of readers, you're helping the site also, and at the same time, you're helping yourself. And I was really shocked with the kind of opportunities that came in. So with parametric architecture, the opportunity came for design writing. With Foyd, which is a events based company, so they do a lot of architectural events, architectural talks, webinars, physical events, and online events. So I didn't know that these guys also need architects on board, because when they approached me, they told me that we would want you as a consultant and a writer. So even the people who host architectural events need architects on board, because they want to know the architect's perspective. And since we know a lot of people in our inner circle, we kind of can make that event happen really good, because in the end, those event companies are serving to architects in the end. So something like that. Moreover, I actually got a social media management gig from LinkedIn as well. So it's actually, I didn't even know that writing could have so much opportunities, but through the approaches that I had on LinkedIn is when I could diversify. Because when I started, I knew that I could do blogs, I could do articles, but through LinkedIn, when all these approaches started coming, is when I realized that architecture is not just about designing or writing. You need people in communications, in business development, in PR, in social media. And all of these, mainstream or non-mainstream, everyone needs architects on board for that. There's also art direction. So we never know what kind of opportunities we might get. So it's better to always start branding ourselves in that perspective, I feel.
And I'm curious because I always want to understand also, now that you have a little bit established yourself as a freelancer, people might hear this and say, okay, this sounds everything very nice. And of course, you've been putting a lot of hard work. And I'm curious, what kind of lifestyle can you afford as a freelance writer? And by that, I mean, like, I don't know, I guess that as you started during studying in the beginning was from your parents' house or something like that. And now do you make same amount of money that you could be making as a wage in India working as an architect, or do you make more? And this is not to, I don't want to know your personal finances or stuff like that. It's just because all the people that have been on the podcast, I want to understand also how they financially do, because as you said, it's very important to be paid, and it's very important to gather the fruits of your work, so to say. So if you can share more, and how is such a work paid? Do you get paid per time that you need to put into the article, or per words, pages? I don't know.
Okay. So initially, when internship, etc., started, the pay was horribly low, to be very frank. But after spending a year, I think it's great. And it's more, I would say, if it's 3 times more than what a junior architect could make in a normal studio. So it's a lot more, it's double, it's 3 times more, and it's great. I mean, and for me, pay was always about it should be equal to how much struggle you're putting in, how much work you're putting in. It should be equal to that. So now, after spending a year, I can say that now it's a retaining business. Now I have a tentative figure in my mind which I achieve every month. So that happens. But the start is very rocky. The way you said that it looks great, etc. But initially, it's really not that great. You have to really keep on upskilling a lot. And once you kind of pass that threshold, then you can start maintaining that amount. And regarding the pricing, there are multiple ways that you can price. So there is on a per word basis, you can do on a project basis, or you can do on a particular article basis or something like that. So initially I started with the price per word for say 6 to 8 months, but after that I've started doing on a per article or a per project basis, because then it's more of a holistic price where the client is also benefited and so are you. And I can say that if you're good at writing, you're good at design writing, then you can make a really great amount of money, which is a lot better than what architects are getting paid. And I don't know about the global scale. I think architects are generally lowly paid, but in India, they are horribly lowly paid, is what I know. So architectural writing and is much more better, is what I feel, if financially is what you're asking. So yeah.
Yeah, and also because you work on a, like to say, international ground, so that you're not really connected to the local wages. Another thing I'm curious about is like freelancing. It's the dream of every millennial, because it gives you this freedom and your boss, your own boss. But one of the, so to say, side effects of freelancing is that you have, as you said, your own team, your own boss, and you have to put yourself in check. So as I mentioned before, when everything is unstructured completely, people tend to be procrastinating, or So how do you deal with that, and how does your day look like? Do you your work day? I mean, like, do you work every day, certain amount of hours, or is it more like flows? Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. And how do you really keep yourself on track when there is a deadline to meet and that you don't really have a real A point, B point in a clear line?
So I usually start by planning everything on Sunday itself. That what am I going to do for the next 7 days, and I break it down as per the work. So it's mainly what I do is writing, I do editing, and I do social media. So I start dividing these things. So maybe if in that week writing work is a lot, so I'll give 4 days for writing, 2 days for social media, and maybe remaining one or two, something like that, for editing something. So this way, what happens is that when you're in that zone of writing, you're really doing just that, and you get a lot of productive work done through that. So on the contrary, if you have all these things mixed in one day in small portions, so this I realized a lot later. Initially, the way you mentioned procrastinating, same, I agree with you. I used to do all of that, but when I started segregating these things is when the quality of work also improved, because you're very much in that zone. For example, if you're recording a podcast and you spend an entire day dealing with that podcast, editing, etc., rather than doing three different chores for that one day, is when you kind of are in that zone only and you get it done. This what happens. And another thing is, I have this app known as Focus Timer. So it has these 25 minutes session. So after every 25 minutes, you get a 5-minute break. Then there's again 25. So it's divided in these small parts. So that app has been a savior, because somewhere to avoid procrastination is you have to compel yourself that to finish this off. Say for an article, if I am saying that I'm going to take 6 hours to make that article happen, you have to kind of break those 6 hours also. That 2 hours I will spend into researching, 2 hours into writing, and 2 hours into editing, something like that. So once you start actually compelling yourself that this has to be done in that time only, is when things get done. But the working hours, as you mentioned, initially, I used to work for 10 to 12 hours because I wanted to get into that retaining sort of a zone that I told you, that, now I don't have to worry. There's this cycle. I wanted more retaining clients. So for that, I was working a lot hard in that perspective. But from the past 4 to 5 months, I spend 6 to 7 hours working. So that is mainly from 8 a.m. to 5 or 4, something like that, so that I have an evening free, and evening free for other things like related to work, etc. So this is what is happening. But yeah, procrastination still happens, and that's a disadvantage of freelancing, because we feel that there's no one overseeing us, it's okay, etc. But the thing is, you can lose a lot of good clients if you start procrastinating or start delivering work at the end moment. So um, for retaining, that is something that you have to do as a practice, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand also, because if you want to leave a good impression, you have to be very much on time. And I've heard about this technique. I heard it's called the Pomodoro timer, where you do the,
Yeah.
a lot of this productivity app have this this timer as well. I use personally Toggle because it's really nice to track your hours. And if you start tracking your hours, honestly, I think it's like I don't know, it's like tracking your calories when you want to lose weight. If you want to get more productive, you should be tracking your minutes and be really honest. Like, did I actually work in these minutes, to see actually how much you can do if you were really on the spot, without checking your phone, without checking your social media and so on. But I want to also know, like, now the really nicest part of your job, which is, what do you like to write about? Do you have some topics that you love to, or what are the kind of stuff that you write about?
So when I started, it's mostly you don't have an option. So you just start writing whatever is given to you. But oh, and I was really bothered by that fact because we want to write. As a writer, we are very inclined towards those certain subjects that we are very much interested to write on. So after a year is when these things started happening, and I started exploring all these different fields. So currently, I'm writing with a company known as Haloof. It's a Dubai-based company. So these guys do a lot of climate change related works in the built environment. So all these articles, all the things that I write for them are basically urging people to sign up the Paris Agreement, where we are talking about where, as a built environment, as architects, we are very much responsible to, make that change happen. And frankly, I don't see any more issue than climate change. There might be things happening here and there, but climate change is the biggest issue, and we are the biggest contributors to that issue. So I was very much interested in that, always wanted to write on it and get paid for it. So somewhere when I got the opportunity for this, it made me really happy. So right now, that is what I'm writing. And also, recently I realized that I was spending a lot of my time doing architecture and architecture related writing. So I started researching as to what more can we do, because architecture is a very creative, artistic kind of a profession. So I started researching and found out some opportunities related to art writing. So I've started writing about art also with a lot of artists, curators, and strangely, it's very tough and because it's new, but I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And I was not really, I was a museum person, but I was not the kind of person who just look at art for 15 minutes and appreciate it or something like that. But after reading about it and researching, now I realize why people do spend that much time looking at it, and it's very interesting. Apart from that, I'm also writing a lot on sustainability and digital twin and parametric architecture, of course, and um, all of these topics. I don't know, even home decor for that matter. I love writing about home decor and interior design also, and all of these. So my portfolio is pretty great right now. It's like home decor, and then there's climate change, writing all of it.
And what is the process that you have developed nowadays to write an article that's, so to say, nice to read? And how long do you spend on an article? Like, do you start with research? How do you start dropping it down? Maybe you do a first drop, then you what is your process? I'm really curious to know what is your creative process as a writer.
So, when I get a topic, the first thing is to literally search the word. No matter how much I might be knowing about that word, it might be as basic as green architecture. I just Google that word and I read a lot of articles related to that. And thank you to podcasts and all these things that have come up. I've recently, started using podcast as a lot of my research tool. Because when I started reading articles, a lot of articles, is when I realized that the initial first six articles have the same info, which has been, repurposed, has been changed to not get caught into plagiarism, etc. And there are trustworthy sources, of course. There's the New Yorker, New York Times, or there are the 12, Désirée, etc., which have really good information. But all these, like if I want to research about an architect or the works that he has done, listening to them from their own perspective, listening what their thoughts are about that particular building is very enlightening, and at the same time it helps me to understand it from that architect's perspective, which I think I'm very thankful to podcasts, to YouTube, to various, these articles, etc., that are my base of research. So I spend a lot of time researching because you can only write well when you are researched enough about that subject. And while researching, I take down a lot of notes, short notes that I think that, after all of these things that I've read, maybe these are the ones that I want to take in my article because they are relevant. Post that, I start making a very detailed outline. So, an outline is basically you are deciding the flow of the entire article, how it should be. It's very detailed. There are headings and there are subheadings and there are more, things added in that. So, when I start writing, it's basically it becomes very easy because if we don't have an outline and if we start writing randomly about things, there is 100% chance that we get drifted towards the subject and we don't stick to the title because it's very necessary to kind of cover it concisely. Otherwise, that article can end up, a 3,000, 5,000 word article, which people are not generally inclined to read that long. And so, yeah, so after I do a rough outline, I send it over to my clients to kind of get their approach on it and their reviews, suggestions, etc. So even when you send a rough outline to your client, they also know what the end product is sort of going to look like. Because if you kind of send that outline direct, if you send that article directly to that client, there is a high chance that it won't resonate with their thought process. So sending an outline is a time saver for both you and the client as well. So that happens, and after a rough outline is when I start framing it part by part while simultaneously researching and reading about it to create that piece. Another thing that I do is that if it's a case study based article or something a lot more descriptive, so I do add an image section in the side where I add all the images and I keep looking at them and writing about it because unlike other things, like if it's writing about finance or cryptocurrency or whatever, all these articles, they don't require a lot of creative base, and we require a lot of creative base. So keeping that image as a side helps a lot to describe that structure or that space much better. Yeah.
And nowadays, how long do you need for an article, more or less?
It depends. So if it's about home decor, I think I can finish that article in 2 hours or 3 hours, researching included, etc. But articles like I told you about climate change, if it's sustainability, built environment, really, macro based article, you could call it. So those take a lot of time, sometimes even 2 to 3 days. And for example, I'm right now researching with Architecture Live, which is it's a portal which is talking about a lot of great things. Like they're talking about industry issues, and as a writer, I'm researching on young Indian firms which are under 10 years and they are doing some exponential work and they are not that known. So they don't have a online presence for that matter. But for example, they are working in a village. There's one guy who's working in a village. He doesn't have an office or a studio of his own. His office becomes the region that he's working in. So he'll basically reside in that house that he's building in. And all these people are really hard to track. So for them, the research process is entirely different. You have to sit on LinkedIn, you have to get their numbers or maybe mail ID, or you have to get a via friend who can, get you in touch with them. So these articles take a month, all these research kind of articles. So it literally depends on what it is, and then that length is defined for time.
I understand. And I'm curious because lately, the last few years, more and more has been talk about how traditional journalism and traditional writing it's a little bit going down because people don't read that much or they don't trust media that much. I'm curious, what do you think about it? What do you think it's gonna be the future of these forms of media? In my opinion, I don't know, this is my personal opinion and you can share if you have any on it. The future is to make media more transparent because in formats like this one, or in formats like, I don't know, the biggest podcast on the world, they're more like, you have this feeling that it's not that scripted, it's not, it's very spontaneous. Like, for the matter of truth, like, I have given you an outline of topics that we can go through, but I haven't been following like so strictly, because as along we talk, I come up with ideas of about things that I could ask you, and then you don't have, it's all the least edited possible, so that people get sort of like if they were sitting on a table with us and listening. So what do you think is going to be the future? Maybe some hybrid form where you have also the audio version of the articles, or what is your idea about it?
Frankly, when you said that, the transparency for that matter, I feel that it is missing in architecture, especially because I see a lot of these big media houses and pages. They're talking about architects, they're talking about this facade, that technology, and it's okay, we have to talk about it, and I love writing about it. But nobody's talking about the pay parity. No one is talking about, for example, I am very proud of the Creative Insider because you are asking those questions and we are discussing this situation of interns not being well treated. And, in big offices, in really big places, they are getting the same treatment, really bad treatment. And it's not for everyone, of course, but people are not talking about this. And this is what affects me the most. The minute some big architect launches some design, unveiling is the unveiling, that's the word. So the minute they start, they are like, this is our new design, every media house wants to publish it, wants to talk about it. But there are very few, like Architecture Live, the way I told you about. Those guys literally told me while researching about these young firms, they said that it's okay if you want to criticize something. It's okay if you find some loopholes and you feel that, this is not right. They were like, it's okay to have an opinion, and your article, your words won't be screened. They'll go as it is. They'll have that meaning. So there are media houses like these as well. But the big ones are really not doing that, is what I feel. And regarding the way you mentioned that, what do you think would be the future of it? I genuinely feel that podcasts are the next big thing and they're here to stay, because even I am a reader, but I can't read while working. So I want to know some new things that are happening. So I just plug in my earphones and I start a podcast and I'm working and listening to it simultaneously. And it could be related to some research that I'm doing. So I can read and listen to something else also to a podcast. So, and a lot of media houses are doing this. They are converting a lot of their articles, blogs into, some podcast, etc. So podcasts are the next thing that journalism will, I think, target, and it is actually already. So that's pretty great. Yeah, and articles are timeless. I think they are not going anywhere. So yeah, they are going to stay.
And I'm curious because you mentioned before the topic you write about, which is climate change. It's more often that you're writing about this, and you need to do a lot of longer research. Are there any things that you have stumbled across your researches that you have educated yourself on, that you have learned in this process, that have been revealing to you or very important for you? Because we have had on our podcast number 50, we have had Sinus Lunge. He's the founder of Effect Architects in Denmark. And their motto, it's eco, not ego. And then they have done now a very interesting exposition at the Biennale where they have tree planted, which are growing and so on. And then although he has this office and he's working on the topic, he was quite, honestly, he was a little, concerned and unsure how it's gonna end up. So what are your point of views on the topic, and what is your research, so to say, leading you towards?
I think first of all, that project by Effect is really great. It's truly amazing. I mean, a, a very unique project for that matter. I really love that. And the more you researched, for example, if it's home decor or if it's about a building or facade, it's really nice, pretty aesthetic things that you read, and it's really nice to read. It's creative, it makes you happy. But when you start reading about climate change and you start reading all these articles in New Yorker or New York Times, all these really great publications with people who are qualified in that specific subject of climate change, and when they talk about all these numbers, and when they talk about numbers especially that built environment is adding to, is when you're kind of left shocked, and you kind of feel responsible, because as a student also, we waste a lot of materials in the form of prints, in the form of models. There is also, emails are also one of the way that a lot of carbon footprint is being established. And you sort of realize that while we were doing this, we were adding something to increase that carbon footprint, and we didn't even realize that we were doing it. So all these facts that we just have 10 years and to kind of fix ourselves as humans to stay on earth, and simultaneously you see Norman Foster and all these big firms taking part in the Habitat Challenge, that the Habitat Challenge by NASA, where they are planning to design on Mars and Moon, because people are planning to leave this planet and go somewhere else. But there is this another um, principle that people have, that nothing is lost. We still have 10 years. We can make things happen by changing the built environment. So these things do affect you a lot. So that's why I told you that climate change is something, writing about it is very close to my heart, because it opens your eyes, and it gives me sort of a sense of content that whatever I'm writing is actually adding some value, more than just writing about facades or spaces and blingy things for that matter. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting topic because, for example, lately we have seen the first commercial flights into space. And then I'm thinking, okay, we are working so hard to reduce our carbon footprint, and then there are these guys that are starting doing want to do on a regular basis flights with rockets which cannot work on anything else but the fuel, and have a great carbon footprint. So I don't know if it's just a lot of green wash marketing that we're doing, and then I don't know, even people like Elon Musk, who has done Tesla, and he's working on all solar energy. In the meantime, he's doing SpaceX. So I don't know, it's very controversial, and I personally need to take a deeper look into it, because I'm curious, how much carbon is wasted on these rockets. I'm not saying that they shouldn't do it, but I'm just saying that not for commercial purposes. I wouldn't do it just for fun. So yeah, it's a very big topic, and needs to be researched deeply into it. What is the approach to this topic in India? Because you seem yourself very self-aware and very concerned about it. I come originally from Bulgaria, which is a smaller European country where people are not so wealthy. And when people are not so wealthy, they don't have the time, to focus on these side problems, because their life itself is so stressful if they need to, hustle to get from one month to the other, and they don't have to think about these side things like, oh, should my car be electric or diesel, or they just need a car. So I'm curious, in a nation as India, where, from my personal, I've never been to India, but I know that there are some people which are very wealthy, very high society, and there are also people that are extremely poor. What is the general opinion on this topic in the general story in a big country like India?
So the issue in India is that our population and the lack of space and a lot of ignorance. So I would pretty much say that it's horrible here and no filter in that. It's truly horrible. But the silver lining is that there are some developer companies like Godrej who really give a damn about the environment. So their buildings are truly sustainable. So there are these different certifications that are lead IGBC, etc. So some responsible developers are doing it on a big scale where they are actually making green buildings, because right now sustainability has become like a USP, that buy a flat in our building, buy a home in our building or something like that, because we are sustainable. But when this you can fool a layman with that. That's what I'm telling you, because people are not that aware. The minute they see it on a hoarding that it's a green building or it's a sustainable building, they sort of believe it. But it's only through these certifications like IGBC lead, etc., is when you can guarantee that these buildings are truly sustainable. So that is happening, but that is not enough, is the situation. It's happening, people are doing it on a micro level, people are talking about it, but it's not that great, frankly. But there are many architects, there are many developers, engineers who are really strong about opinions like these. So they are working on it, but there's a long, long way to go for sure.
I see. Well, I think we've gotten very nice, interesting perspectives and point of views from the view of a writer as you are, and what I want to try to do for each podcast is to create sort of a toolbox of inspiration for all the listeners. So I want to ask you if you could share about some of your favorite media or favorite form of inspiration in a form of podcasts, books, movies. You don't have to share each of those, but if there is some form, it can be a YouTube video or something that you really have impacted you, or that really it's a source of inspiration for yourself.
I think I read a lot of books. So Murakami is something that has been a lot of inspiration in writing and how to write. The fact, because he simplifies writing and his books are really complex. I mean, he uses simple words, but they have a sense of complexity. So Murakami is someone whom I find really inspirational. There are books by Paulo Coelho, which I have been following for, I think, since I was really a child that way. So I have a lot of book related and novelist kind of inspirations. But I do watch a lot of movies, and The Intern as a movie is something I have rewatched. I have lost count, but I like that book because I like that movie because it's very inspirational. It keeps you sort of on your toes, and it makes you believe that you might have an idea and maybe it will work, something like that. Because a lot of our struggle to make that idea happen is with us than the other people, is what I feel. Once you kind of break that barrier of you stopping yourself, there's a long way to go. And there are a lot of Netflix series related to architecture, like Abstract, which I rewatch a lot. So I watch Abstract episodes a lot of time because I love watching that series, and it's very inspirational to see how creatives think. There are a lot of YouTube videos, for that matter. I've lost count, but a lot of inspirational YouTube videos where people tell you all these knickknacks on how you can increase your productivity, etc. We might think that there's so much information. I used to think that at first, that everybody is posting something everywhere. There is some information, but it's great to listen to such information because it's actually helpful, and people are spending so much time to kind of make it. So YouTube videos and podcasts have been my new favorite thing. And I like, now I'm not being biased, but I like the Creative Insider and the kind of content that you guys post because it's innovative. Yeah.
Thank you for the kind words. I wanna finish by saying I hope that you will at some time soon write an article about our our podcast on some of the media you work for. Last but not least, when can people find you online and find more about you online?
So I'm always on LinkedIn. It's Saili Sawantt, and on Instagram as well. So I do interact with a lot of people through Instagram and LinkedIn. So you can follow me there. It's just Saili Sawantt, and yeah.
Yeah, this is how we got in touch too. So I'll be adding the links to your accounts in the description of the podcast. So thank you very much, Sayli, and thank you for your time. And I wish you a great day.
Thank you. Bye, Georgi.
Bye bye.
The whole world stops just like that.
Hey friends, thank you very much for listening to this podcast. You've been amazing. Before we go, I just want to remind you that if you want to support us, you can just go on the creativeinsider.com where you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter, or you can follow us on our social media channels, which are Instagram at TCI Podcast or the LinkedIn page, The Creative Insider. By doing this, you will have a bigger social media presence, which always looks attractive to more and more important guests. And so this is very fundamental. And if you really love what we do and you want to help us doing a better production, just click on the Patreon link below where you can support us with the wished amount of money you think it's okay for you. It's a monthly subscription, but you can cancel anytime. So thank you very much and have a good week, guys. Bye bye.